Yes. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Todd Coley. I'm a principal and landscape architect with Smith Group and part of the Northern California SLA Chapter's Executive Committee. On behalf of the chapter, thank you for joining our talk today. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you're comfortable, please turn on your camera. It'd be great for everyone to see each other, especially since this is an intimate group and we've all still been working from home. So June can see everybody. It'd be great if you did that. And then you can utilize the Zoom function to send any questions you might have during the presentation. So as you've seen in emails and the chapter social media channels, this lecture series has been going on since summer of 2020. And if you missed some of them and wanted to watch any of them, it's on our chapter's website and our YouTube channel. We've been really working hard as a team to look at future speakers. Future speakers, and we've now done this first half of the year with some of our friends from Sasaki over in Boston to Kona Gray to now June Grant in June, and we're working on July through December. Right now we have 5 of 6 of the months committed to speaking, and likely within a week we'll have the 6th confirmed. So once that confirmation has occurred, we will update a graphic and send an email blast announcement and post the next 6 lectures on our website to allow you to register for those upcoming. Next month in July, we've got the founder and CEO of the Cultural Landscape Foundation, Charles Birnbaum, as our guest speaker. Today, we have the pleasure of listening to June Grant, who's an architect, founder and design principal at Blink Lab Architecture, a boutique research-based architecture and urban design practice. Launched in 2014, Blink Lab is based on June's 20 years experience in architecture, design, and the urban regeneration of cities and communities. Her design approach rests on an avid belief in cultural empathy, data research, and new technologies and as integral to design features and design solutions. Blink Lab has 3 mandates: a commitment to design exploration, advocacy for holistic solutions, and the integration of technology as a central component for a regenerative society. Ms. Grant is also the current president of the San Francisco chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects and an Acadia board member, a 2019 Yerba Buena Center for the Arts 100 honoree, and a 2020 Women's Human Rights honoree, and the 2020 10th annual J. Max Bond Jr. lecturer. I've had the privilege of knowing June for over 10 years and have worked with her while at EDAL and AECOM on the NASA Ames building in Mountain View, and then a competition with her a few years ago while at Populous for a sea level rise competition where we were one of 3 finalists. On behalf of the chapter, please welcome my friend June.
Thanks, Todd. I want to make one correction. I'm no longer the president of SF-NOMA, but the immediate past president. As I shifted over to embrace my technology part and joined the board at Arcadia. Thank you for the invitation to speak, and I much prefer small groups. You know, after a while, you get a little bit tired of talking to many different faces that you don't get a chance to connect. So I'm hoping that we can have a really great conversation at the end of the presentations. And what I have selected, I'm going to start showing a little bit, but just to give a little bit of background. When I started the practice, I really thought I was going to be continuing to design high performance architecture. And coming into Oakland, I realized that there was a bigger issue at hand. There wasn't a dialogue around sustainable design for buildings, and there is still no dialogue around sustainable design for buildings and even our environment. So I realized I had to pull back to understand the context and what were communities really in need of. What could I begin to address rather than try and sell service? And that's really how Blink Lab really got grounded in the community, was pulling back from what I thought was going to be my adventure and launch path really looking at, what exactly is my market, and figuring out how best to meet that. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen, and then I'm gonna turn my camera off because that will improve the sound. Okay. And my slides are timed, so let me hit the play button. Let me move this one out of the way. So in talking to Todd and Krista about what I would speak about, I thought it would be important to talk about my approach and why we're not strictly designers of buildings, and why I decided to embrace going outside the traditional boundaries of what an architect would pursue. And I think I was very much influenced by the short time I got to sit with the EDAW group at Chestnut Street and hear some of the conversations and seeing some of the approach. And over the years, while at AECOM, I'm realizing that I could not be confined just to buildings, but rather I was interested in a complete holistic approach to the environment. And so I'm still very much passionate about the sculptural form of the building, but I am also very much deeply committed to the horizontal. What is that landscape? And then that fourth dimension, what is that time frame? What are we leaving for humanity? And someone raised a good question last week on Facebook was, are we being good ancestors? And I thought that question really targeted my approach, where I am definitely absolutely committed to design and form and composition. But I realized you have to advocate for design, and you have to advocate for what's right. And also the use of the integration of technology to do right. Most times technology is brought in as really this blue sky solution, but it doesn't begin to address the immediate needs of the underground. And so over the last 18 months, there have been particular events that have really struck me. And one was this phrase from Congresswoman Marsha Fudge, where it starts to tug at what I deal with is, do people like me fit in? And you'd be surprised that although I'm African-American culturally, I may not fit into a community because I don't know them. So I have to spend time getting to know communities. So this is, my office is pretty close to this street, less than 5 minutes drive. But because I drive through it often, over the last 5 years, I've been wondering about why do so many streets in Oakland look like this? It wasn't that someone got up one morning and said this is what they wanted to live in. And in getting to know community groups, I spent many years going to community meetings. I don't live in this neighborhood anymore, but I still keep in contact with the group. I got to hear that this was actually a beautiful neighborhood. This was the middle income, middle class African-American community up until 1970s. And there were specific things that happened over the years that resulted in the decline of this neighborhood. And then as a community, members who are there, who are like 5 generations from the first person who immigrated from the South, they tell you stories of what this neighborhood used to look like. This is where the first Black mayor for Oakland came from. The first Black librarian came from this neighborhood. The first Black fire station. This neighborhood, I've seen photos, was kids running down the street, healthy trees. It's hard to imagine that this was once a vibrant community. And so in talking and walking and trying to understand this context I put myself in, I really had to go through this really fast understanding that my formal training was going to have to sit on the side for a little bit, and I'm going to have to deep dive into programming and client research, what we now call community engagement to some extent, but I actually call it programming because I'm working directly with my clients. And so one of the things that came out of the last 5 years is that as architects, particularly Black architects, we work with a very informal network. And it takes a lot of sensitivity to understand what that network and how strong that informal network is. They have no strength at City Hall. But if you want something done, you call one individual and they can find 10 who can provide what you need. And it's that informal network that gives me the leg up on some of these ideas. So what you're looking at is actually a street corner event. We call it the Street Corner Library. I think our first one was 2018, maybe 2017 even, where I introduced community members to digital fabrication for the very first time. And my challenge was, as architects and designers, we typically bring like a ready-made solution and it's brought in, the contractor, nails it in place. But for communities like this, that's not what you need to do. They're not interested in us bringing ready-made solutions. The person that you see on the screen was really one of those individuals that helped me crystallize how we were going to work in the studio. Altaneer, 5th generation from Louisiana. She said to me, June, I want my library back. And I literally said to her, where did your library go? And she explained both were demolished in the 70s when the highway was brought in. And when I asked her how old she was. She said she was 80. And I thought, Altaneer, there's no way you and I are going to bring a library back. We need an army to get this thing going. You're 80. Chances are you may not live to see this library, but we have to start. So what my design skill set became design strategy, strategizing around how do you bring a program to fruition. These are skill sets that, we provide to corporate clients through program management. And what I do is exactly the same thing with community groups, which is to figure out what is it that we want at the end game. And then we lay out a strategy of how do we get that need broadcasted and really encourage community members to galvanize around the issue because we need them as our foot soldiers. And my job is just to design, but I design the strategy of how we're going to get there. And part of that design, the strategy is really understanding some of the power players in the past as well as the present. For example, one of the historians in the community unearthed a document from the 30s where a librarian said, this community does not read. Yet we could find photos of 2 libraries in that community from the 30s populated, where the library is completely flooded by African-American students reading. So clearly there was evidence that the library and the reading rooms were being used, but yet this head librarian wrote, it's okay to demolish, it's okay to ignore this community. And these are the things that as architects, we don't typically do research around because it doesn't fall under the bucket of what is the building, what is the landscape, what's the sidewalk, what civil engineers. This is only available through talking to community members about the history of the community. And typically they will be able to tell me the lineage of past decisions that resulted in the conditions that they're in today. And this was stunning for me to realize that as an architect, I was gonna have to pull in political understandings as well as design skills. So we became a little bit of a guerrilla group where once I embraced the idea we're going to do a library was to figure out how to make this obviously known. So we came up and got an agreement with the person who owns this parcel, which is a parking lot. And then in Oakland, we have this fantastic program called Adopt a Spot. You fill out a 1-page form, and that gives you rights to use public land. You're the caretaker. And so adjacent to that, this parking lot is 250 square feet of a triangle that we had the rights to use for a year. And with that right, we did the Street Corner Library event, which allowed us to broadcast the history of this community, to broadcast the need of a library, because the closest library was 1.5 miles away. And we were able to pull and reach into historic members of the community, the great nephew of the first mayor, the niece of the first Black librarian. We pulled in historic figures, and individuals who had left the community came back to participate in these street corner events. And so what we were able to do was create energy around a topic. I don't call this placemaking, I don't call this site activation. I actually call it propaganda, because that's exactly what we do. With maybe a little bit of agitprop, because I know I'm agitating using the props of architecture and design. And so we would literally take over the sidewalk once a month, once every 2 months. Maybe 200 of us would be there, and it's a library exchange. We would have collected books freely given. Individuals would walk by and take whatever books they wanted and leave whatever books they did want. The Oakland Public Library became a partner with this. And this was critical because the libraries are administered by the Oakland Library Services. And so what we needed was for them to buy into the idea so we could get funding around design of the building. So this was our site plan. We had the library towers, which I built, and we had the community assemble so they would learn about digital fabrication techniques. We had tables where we had maps where individuals can, we treated it more of an ethnographic research where we did asset mapping as well as history mapping, because it was critical to know that what we saw today, what we see today was not what it was before. And we wanted to know where were things, where were the places that were of value, what were the activities that people cherished from the past that those of us who are new would never know. And then we had four actually cheap foam core boards where we asked everyone to answer one question: what would the library mean to you? And this way we were able to have both a little bit of fun, but also a little bit of public creativity around this initiative. And this was pretty much our approach for about 2 years to really start to get attention around this issue. We also used our connections with the local paper and KQED, and to really start to push the message out about the need. So what you're seeing is the typical weekend event. Kids would show up, we would have hundreds of books to give away, which were being stored at a local, a business owner gave us a storeroom a few blocks away from where we'd be. And this was it. This was the library event. Now, as a designer, this is not what we think we would be doing, when you're in my entire life. But what I realized that I can't get a library built if I don't have the support of the community, and if I don't have the support of the city. And what is happening is that most cities' planning departments are unaware of the history of some communities and unaware of the assets that the communities have, both formally and informally. And so this project really opened my eyes up to the amazing strength of informal communities. What made us even more popular was we did interviews. We would invite historic residents, interview them, and post videotapes on Facebook. So we love social media. So now we have the city of Oakland has committed to building a library for the community. We had originally hoped to break ground 2022. Most likely we won't start design until 2022. But that was the fruit of the efforts of 2 years of agitprop on the corner, this is what we wanted. We wanted the city of Oakland to realize that this community deserved a library, and this community should, and we needed their support. And so the next top part I want to point out is the housing crisis. I love prefab, I love technology, but what I'm seeing is that all I'm hearing is the containment of human bodies. I don't hear about us designing communities. I don't hear us designing for humanity, a dignified living. What I keep hearing is how many houses we have to build. And when I look at the designs, I am very concerned that I don't see how a community could be formed within these housing blocks. To a large extent, I'm seeing the apartment units are even smaller than the past. And when I compare this to Russian 60s, 40s, corporate housing, social housing, we are heading in that direction. And the micro units and shared bathrooms and shared kitchens are absolutely no different from what was built in Russia. And so I have a little problem with this. As much as I agree with the efficiency of the factory model, I am concerned that we are not addressing wealth accumulation, because if it's an apartment, I'm paying rent. And so I am more interested in how can I secure a community by giving them back some kind of asset that they can get some income from, not necessarily design and build another multi-unit unit that's owned by a corporation or a nonprofit. So when I look at housing, I was asked by a community member, not too far from my office again, fifth generation African-American homeowner. She was in our neighborhood, and I said, how many African-Americans are there? And she said, there used to be 24 on her block, but there are now 5. And she said she no longer felt secure in her own neighborhood. And that broke my heart, because here it is, she was born and raised in a community that had changed so much that she no longer felt secure in her own neighborhood. And I started to wonder how many others were going through the same experience, and what could I do? So did a little bit of coding, figured out how many backyard structures there existed in Oakland, targeted some neighborhoods. We have close to 10,000 people living on our streets. We have 68,000 single family homes. Most of them have some kind of accessory structure in the back filled with last year's bicycle and all kinds of junk. My idea was, can we convert those, expand them so they become dignified, livable units that can be rented out? There was also another study that was recently done that many older, not just African-American individuals at the age of 50 are increasingly showing up on our streets. And that really shocked me, when the average age of the San Francisco homeless is 50, not you're young and strung out, but actually 50. And it was because of a medical issue that forced them to sell their house and in order to pay the medical bills. And as a result, we're ending up on the street. So the need to find a way to adapt these smaller structures in the backyard became more urgent for me, because I don't understand how, as a country, we are okay with seeing people living on the streets. That for me is just not a tenable situation. So I thought I could try and do something. So we designed 3 in-law units based on what I call the wet module, which is where the kitchen and the bathroom are ganged together. And then you just kind of stuff, the living room, bedroom, and then outdoor deck, because I think you need to have social spaces that are not necessarily inside your. And so we did these 3 models, and along the way, AARP discovered what I was working on and gave me some funding to keep going. And as a result, we created a catalog that now AARP distributes freely to their members. And we're just about to enter the 2nd print. So we're going to do an update of the catalog. The catalog is issued 2019. We're just about to do a 2nd round of updating that catalog, where literally you can download architectural plans. So we have all the plans, all the equipment, everything in the free for anyone to download and use these floor plans. We're doing a similar effort specifically for Oakland, and where Oakland's a little bit different is where I'm actually pushing the idea of the barn raise, where the community comes together to build the structure. This is really quite an interesting approach, especially since we're short of labor in the construction industry at the moment. And so I am looking at the barn raise or the wall raise as a means to knit back community spirit, but also recognizing we don't have labor out there anymore. So we have to dig locally to get that labor to build it. And we have to be honest, an in-law unit, really and truly, is a shed with water and power attached to it. That's it. This does not require advanced degree to build an in-law unit. And so that was my approach, was, can we look at labor models? Can we look at the factory model of, okay, what if we set up a jig in someone's garage? We can actually frame out walls in one site, truck it to the site that we need to install the walls. And in theory, bing, bang, boom, you have an in-law unit. And so we're just about to kick off this approach in Oakland. We've done 3 new designs for Oakland specifically, and just about to go into phase 2, which is getting the permits pre-approved, and the contractors are now being introduced to the models. These come completely with all the appliances specified, with a few options for homeowners, like pick your own paint and pick your own light fixture, but everything's included in the model. And so that's part of my, as a designer, looking at not just design of the building, but design of the delivery of the building, and then expanding that to understanding delivering the design also means I am looking now at delivering the labor force that's going to support the designs. Typically, you know, we design and we specify and we do a spec book, and the contractor looks at your spec book maybe and goes out and orders the equipment that you've specified, and they install it. For projects like these, I am looking now at labor force. Can I teach our local labor force about new efficient models of delivery? And that's where the in-law unit project is now at, where I'm calling it phase 3, which is the labor force. Through working this way, these are both independent projects. Through working this way, I have kind of flipped the script, where the institution comes to me after I've done my research and my work with the community. Because what I've found, if when the institution approached me first, institutions come with a lot of political pressure about what the checklist they need to fully accomplish. Most times that checklist doesn't meet the needs of the community. And so what I do is I work directly with the community on a topic that the community has brought to my attention. I research it, we work with the community to do the design, and then we go and peddle it, shop it, present it to institutions to say, we would like your support. And so that's how I'm kind of flipping the fee for service model, by actually working with community first, building up the story, and then pitching it kind of like an entrepreneur would do. In that process, we are addressing the needs of quite a few, addressing the fact that, you know, we have a lot of retired individuals. We're living until 100 years old. We need to find a different way. The project you see on the screen is probably my favorite project. It's in Apalachicola, Florida. It's a rural town. It used to be predominantly African-American. And this is a town where there was a lot of wealth accumulated during the time of segregation. And now what has happened as a result of integration, the population has dwindled to less than 2,000. But there's a lot of land. It's one of the few places where at nighttime, there are no street lights and you can see all the stars. It's where you could walk on the streets in the 11 or midnight and feel safe. It's where also the city is being taken over by the trees, the palm trees, the pine trees. They're literally absorbing all the abandoned houses. But also what is happening is that individuals who are retiring early are moving to Apalachicola because it's a beach coast town. It's 2 hours drive from Tallahassee. You have to drive over a highway to get into town. You kind of drop into this gorgeous setting. And then it's like, it's your own version of Martha's Vineyards before Martha's Vineyard became so wealthy. And this community is working with the Florida A&M, a historically Black university, and where they asked me to come and take a look at housing and in-law units as a strategy to revive the town and the Black community. And what you're looking at is some of the quotes from interviews with family members who are there. Some families are still there. What is unique, what you're seeing in the green are all the businesses that used to be there that no longer exist, and educational institutions that used to be there that no longer operate. So there used to be vibrant. Despite the level of poverty that you might expect in terms of, you know, unpaved roads, et cetera. It was a very vibrant community. But what really appealed to me was, is it possible to use a small housing type as the way to revive this little city? I'm not even sure if it's a city or a town legally, where the population expands by 3- to 4-fold twice a year. families come back November and February. And then the city swells and all the families come back. And what I learned was in this little town, there are about 5 or 6 core families that owned lots of land. But this is the condition of most of the structures that are there. And what I was asked to do was to come and observe a kind of a pop-up museum that Marcia Smith, film director, wanted to bring back some memory about this town used to be like. And so she took over this house, installed super large photographs of historic families and events, and invited the population to come to this pop-up museum. And what was phenomenal, and my job was to observe and hear the stories because these things are not in books. And I had the university history department had been cataloging land transfer, who used to live where, what parcels are available. And through the history students' research about parcel history and my hearing some of the stories, I determined that it wasn't necessarily in-law units that was a solution to the city, but rather it was actually more of a landscape and architecture mixed with economics that was truly the solution. But also to spark that level of economic investment, we would need to formally celebrate moments from the past. And so the amphitheater that was it will come up in a little bit. The amphitheater idea and the landscaping came up because this is exactly where the community gathers twice a year for special events, and they didn't have a covered stage. They would always truck in a rented stage. And I thought, if we're going to start to desire investment and families to move back, then we need to mark the ground that we're serious, and we need a permanent structure of celebration. And then we also needed to provide seating. So this was just like this really ambitious idea around putting in a stage as a marker for we're coming back, putting in a stage of where they come in twice a year. And so that's a really long-term project. And then the last project, this is one where we were able to use technology at the forefront, which is like, Blink Lab is design, advocacy, technology. This is where the technology was at the forefront, where we're using digital design and fabrication to quickly address an acoustical problem for the after-school program, but also use branding techniques, and we just like to code. So we did 10 different panels, fabricated 5 minutes from my office. I'm always using local labor. So 5 minutes from my office was a guy that can laser cut wool. He was 5 minutes away from my project site. We 3D printed how the panels will be hooked on the walls, because we have a 3D printer in the office. And so this was a really quick solution to an acoustical problem. But the fallout from this, which was spectacular, was institutions and funders started to really understand that you have to bring in designers earlier. And maybe if you have that early programming discussion, we can influence projects and influence funding so that it's more effective. What was happening in the past was nonprofits would apply for funding, funders would give them the funding, but most times these nonprofits do not have an architect or designer with them at the table at the very beginning. And so they're unaware of A, how much funding they need, B, what does it take to build and construct, time frame. There are just some unrealistic expectations from many of the nonprofits, well-intended. But if they were just had the funding or knew that they should bring in a designer earlier, a lot of our projects could be built and with a lot more exploration than I think we're seeing right now on the landscape. And so this project is just one of many. We have outdoor seating being designed and fabricated. We have outdoor light fixtures being fabricated, all coming from just looking at what's missing from communities and trying to solve for that quickly and then going out to institutions to say you care about community. Here is a ready, steady project, support it, let's build it. And what this allows us to do once we have institution on board the project is I'm now able to go back to City of Oakland and talk to building and planning and the mayor's offices, say, hey, we have a funder, we have a project, we would like to install it. Can you give us some help? And so far, they're still accepting my calls at City Hall. So I think I'm doing well. So this is my call out to, I have this call on every project that I present. My call out to the landscape profession is I need you guys to be impatient with the boundaries that exist between architecture and landscape. I don't agree with them. I really do believe that we're in the time where it's the role of the landscape architect is actually now, because you guys deal with the wider cross section of land and territory and history than architects typically do. You understand what happens when you make a change in the land form, which we don't. And this is one of the reasons why I think it is really time for landscape architects to also be advocates for change. Too often I am in meetings where I see some urban planners, but they're not urban designers, so they don't understand physical form. There might be a few architects in the room, but never do I see a landscape architect advocating for what's going on the land. And I think it's time for you guys to be there. I think the ground plane has been set for your voices to be heard, but the biggest hurdle you're gonna come across is most individuals don't understand what landscape architecture is or what you guys do, as they don't understand what an architect does. So you may have to do a little bit of backpedaling to explain the ramifications of the breadth of what you bring to the table. So I'm gonna stop here. I think this is supposed to say something else about Black space, but I'm gonna stop there. Can you see each other now?
Yeah, you can put your video on too if you'd like. And anybody else that wants to. That was great. And there's so many different topics that you hit. I'm really interested to see what people think and questions that might come up here. Thank you, June.
You're welcome.
That was amazing. Is it okay if I jump in?
Totally.
Go, Blake.
All right. Well, I'm glad it's the time for landscape architecture, but man, that was also the time for June. That was amazing. And thank goodness that's recorded, because everyone should see this. You know, it's just mind blowing. So I guess one of the questions I had for you, June, is it seems like you've had a lot of success in this like flipped process that you developed. And I was just wondering, you know, a lot of times people are talking about how do we get, you know, community engagement, or how do we get community buy-in by flipping it around and just solving, you know, a problem. It seems like that was just a natural way to get that started. But I'm curious because you have these different project locations. So like, what does day one look like for June when you're going to a place where you haven't necessarily worked before?
There's usually someone who has invited me, just as Todd invited me to speak. I rarely ever go into new zones where I don't know someone. Typically I'm invited. Apalachicola, I was brought there because I'm Jamaican. There's a Jamaican dean at FAMU. He said, June, you know, we have this project. And that's how I ended up in I had never heard of Apalachicola. In Oakland, I literally went to community meetings. I just forced myself to meet folks, and I'm not the most extroverted person, but I thought it was critical to hear. And one of the things that came away from those meetings was the level of anger in communities. And that really, it really disturbed me, the level of anger. And I thought, well, there's no way I can just bring myself in as a messiah. I have to learn now to sit back and really take the hits. And there are a lot, there are a lot of hits before I could get trust on the part of community groups. It's distinctly different from private clients. And we have private clients as well. but it's radically different approach. So I going with no game plan other than I'm here to listen, literally. I don't even have a trace. I have no symbols of authority when I go in to the first meeting. Does that answer your
Broke up
question?
a little
Blake?
bit for me. Did it break up for other people?
Okay.
Yeah, a bit.
I'm gonna turn my video. I think it's on my side. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I literally, when I go to meetings, I don't carry anything with me other than myself and my handbag. I have no symbols of authority, no red pen, no trace, nothing that might. There is so much distrust that I cannot make the assumption that because I'm Black, I'm welcomed. I have to go in recognizing that there's also, you have a degree. Even that level of difference sparks distrust. You are not one of us. We don't know you. So I go in fully prepared, chest bared, that I'm going to get hit with some arrows, and I'm there to listen. And it takes a few meetings to get trust, but usually someone brings me in.
Thank you for that.
And I was going to say anybody should just unmute themselves and ask a question. But while we're waiting for someone to lean in, June, maybe on for community groups, sometimes they're not as organized as, say, a developer client. What are some of the challenges of working with communities that you've found since founding Blink Lab?
All right, I'm gonna go back. Yeah, that's the biggest challenge, because there are a lot of assumptions about process and how long process will take. So I'll give an example. We're doing the design on a culturally historic building, and typically we would have done the building analysis as well as done parallel with community outreach, and that group has been very clear. That client wants to do all the outreach themselves. They do not want us there, that they want us to just focus on the buildings before and do the building analysis before we start to engage with community members about what the design can be. And that is one of the biggest lessons, is we talk about engagement, and we have the history of the Post-its and the dots. But what I found, what communities really, really want to do, they literally want to draw. They want to draw their own solutions. They want to see their solutions on the table. They literally, it took me a while to really understand where they said, we want to be heard. And they're like, no, I heard you. And then I realized, no. What they really mean is they want to participate in a meaningful way, and they want to show their creativity just as much as I am eager to show mine. And that is the biggest thing for me to have learned over the last, even every week it's a new lesson. Oh, that's what they mean. Oh, that's the level of engagement they want to go. Oh, it's for me, it's peeling back the layers of formal processes. So I keep saying, it's like going back to that first day in kindergarten, and you don't know anyone, but everybody seems to know everyone in the sandbox. So you're trying to figure out, how do I get in the sandbox and be embraced? And you try to, you kind of saddle up and stand by the sandbox and hope somebody will notice you. And then they say, hey, you can stick your foot in. That's exactly the process. It's no different than the first day of kindergarten. And every new project is exactly the same feeling. It's exactly the same feeling.
Hi, June. This is Michelle. I may have a question that it comes out of what I'm about to say, but even though you were brought in by somebody in the community, it seems like it took your initial outrage to attend public meetings and almost kind of initiate projects, and it seems like you brought in so much of a vision to the community. And I completely agree with you that landscape architects action needs to be taken now. And I think every year in the past, probably 20 years of my career, I said that. And it's been more amplified since I joined the public sector in about 15 years ago. I'm in planning department for the city of Hayward, and it is almost outrageous within the city inner departments and professional developers and groups, that how ignorant they are of a landscape architect's role and what kinds of contributions that we could make. So you mentioned, that we need to be actively involved now. Do you suggest, I guess, I've been saying the same, but
Is your question, how do you start?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. No, I understand completely. I want to make sure that this is recorded properly, so I'm going to go off again. It starts with tackling the issue that you are seeing from the eyes of a landscape architect. I decided to tackle the street and the street conditions in order to get to a library, because I'm very concerned about education of the population. And I love libraries. And I love the evolution of libraries, but I couldn't get to the library project unless I started to deal with some of these other issues that the community lived in, like a simple chair at a bus stop. For landscape architects, that's also, the streetscape is also your concern to some extent. There are creeks. I'll give one example. Since you're in Hayward, there's the San Leandro Creek, which I'm not sure if it goes through Hayward or not. That is a project I became involved in to help clean up the Creek Day, and discovered a community group that was actively engaged in getting a greenway built. They had a dream of a greenway along the creek. I still think it's possible. This community group had no landscape architects working with them. This creek is amazing. The walkway along it is fantastic. This community group came together around the issues, not just about the creek, but they recognized there are people living on the creek. They also recognized that they wanted the creek to be maintained. Who was going to maintain that? Who had the skill sets locally? That meant they had to figure out an education program, that there's going to have to be a conservatory for the creek, and that someone's going to have to teach the local people how to keep the creek clean. Like the community themselves figured out the cycle of support this creek would need. There was not a single landscape architect in this group. And when I heard, and then they realized that they also need housing for the people who are homeless on the creek. And decided that they were also, let's build some in-law units. I mean, this is a radical vision. I'm going to cut to the end. They were awarded $28 million from the state of California to pursue this really holistic dream that they have really staked out all the points they want to accomplish. And I went to a meeting, heard the dream, saw that they were missing the graphics to explain the dream, how that dream would come together. And that's when I said they really should have had a landscape architect as a team to show how everything came together to support that creek. What I did was really just show a diagram of how all the pieces come together as an ecosystem. I let the community and their sketches go ahead. And my job on that entire pursuit was just to pull everything together in one succinct diagram that they could include in their application to the state. And they won one of the largest awards to a community group, 28 million, that they're going to be in charge of disseminating the whole process. That's where I think landscape architects could be, is just really start going to the issue that they see in the community and looking to see if their community groups actually working or interested in that, and then join that community group. Don't try to lead or form a group, because they don't turn up. Community groups don't turn up for that. But you go to their community meetings and find out what they care about. Does that help?
I'm familiar with that project. And unfortunately, that particular improvement, it's limited to San Leandro. And so I
Yes.
did win, but Hayward was excluded from it. And I am very familiar with the Friends of San Lorenzo Creek, that led by Bruce King.
But you get my point, right?
Yes,
The
absolutely.
point is more about,
So yeah. It requires a tenacity as well. So I thank you so much for your contribution. It's just amazing and very, very inspiring.
Mhm. And I think that speaks to what you opened up your presentation with, June, about how we need to create a better dialogue around the sustainable environment. I think that example that you shared is how you put that into practice. And I know Blake is on this call and he is leading our sustainability and stewardship group. And so I'm sure that's like bringing some ideas for inspiration. I know we're coming close to the end of our time. And it's funny you say you're an introvert, because I feel like some of your ideas that you bring they're extroverted ideas. And they're very engaging to the community. And I think it's really easy to see through how you presented today, how you're used to going to the community, because even how you shared your words and your experiences, they were in a very digestible way and very easy to understand. And so that's definitely a skill. So I just wanted to say that is very amazing of you. And so,
because I deliberately didn't choose any floor plans, site plans, no technical drawings.
yeah, and so I guess kind of wrapping up, I know I'm going a little off script here, but what role do landscape architects play in your firm? Do you have any on staff? And then a second part to that question is, how can our ASLA chapter partner with you to propel your mission in this space and within the Bay Area and beyond?
Yeah, so I'll give, hoping this is coming clear, I don't have to go off again. We're 5 in the studio, and we're modeled off of the Rolling Stones, who they're 80 years old and still rocking, but they're surrounded by 1 million people that are consultants and supporters to their what they do, which is to perform. And that's exactly how my studio operates. So we collaborate with everybody. I have no qualms in saying I have a project, and I'll reach out and go, Todd, I have a project. And that's pretty much how I work, is depending on the project. And I think the personalities might be a good fit. Then I simply just reach out. I don't have any qualms in saying we need support on something, or here's a project, I think you might like it. And that's how, and even individuals will call and say, June, what are you working on now? So, well, we have this thing. We're not sure if it's too small for you, but it could be fun. So that's being open to receiving requests is pretty much how it works on our end. So we don't have any landscape architects, although we would love a water person, because we're going up the Sacramento River.
And then how can we partner with our ASLA chapter to help propel your mission?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't think do I have a mission other than to design? I just want to design. I really just want to stay in my little cubby hole and in my studio and design. I really don't want to have to go out there and interact. I just want to design. But no, I think I would love it if the ASLA was a lot more visible. I don't know if it's making presentations to communities. I really think our population, the average population, is not aware of the skill sets that we all bring to the table. And I think it's time for professional organizations to start going, hey, we would like to present to your community group. We know we're not trying to get a project. We just want folks to know about what we do. A roadshow would be great to communities. I think that would be amazing.
Well, and I've been traveling across the country this year. I notice in each city you go to, you'll go to a downtown and you'll see an AIA headquarters, and a lot of people will understand, oh, that's architecture.
Yeah.
But I believe ASLA only has one headquarters that's in Washington, DC. And so unless you're in that space, it's
The
hard
other
to-
reason why I think a roadshow to community groups makes sense is that most families can understand landscape easier than they can. Although they might talk about landscapers, you just have to get over that. But I think as an entry point to design and to an entry point about the urban landscape, that it's easier for individuals to understand your conversation than it is for them to understand architecture, because they're in the environment every day. They walk a sidewalk every day. They complain about the sidewalk every day. So yeah. But thank you for the invitation, Tom. Really
Yeah,
enjoyed this.
absolutely. Krista, do you want to wrap up or?
I think we can end on that note unless there's any other burning questions. I feel like June already gave us our call to action, so.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, June, for your time. I know we've gone over, but this, as Blake and others have said, this is great that it's recorded. We can share this with our executive team on our next meeting and post this on social media to get others to watch your insight.
Great. Well, thank you for the invitation. You guys have a good day.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.